I'd like to invite Ian McDonald, our crop innovation specialist with Onfarm, to the podium to, well, talk probably about statistics and why a 12 bushel yield difference on 250 bushel corn probably isn't statistically significant. I don't believe he ever sleeps, and that's likely why I have a whole page of an introduction to read, but I'm going to forego that for the sake of time.
And I got my clock to keep me on time, even though there is one here. So thanks for having me here. Let's make this thing work. I know. Okay. So as we go through this next 20 minutes, I want you to think about this. Who are your people? Because it impacts where we're going in the future, okay? So I'm smart enough to know that I'm not smart enough, okay? And I really need to find a team to build around me that's going to help me meet the needs that I have. And so that team is what my presentation is about. Okay, so this is right off of the strategic report from OSCIA, and I'll let you read those statements yourselves, but it essentially says, what are we about? We are about doing collaborative work together on-farm research to the benefit of ourselves and society as a whole, okay? And so note in this last statement, a very important thing is the wording there is optimal, not maximum, and this idea that we have to target optimum and not chase maximum. Okay, so do you have on-farm research questions? And so I find a lot of time when I ask farmers if they have the research questions that they want answered, they kind of get a little bit anxious about that. So I think we need to rephrase how we ask the question. And we need to ask, what are you curious about? Because I'm curious about a whole bunch of things, and then I can start working through, well, what's the research question that I can build out of that? But to get the input, we need to know what people are curious about. Okay, what is research? What is on-farm research? It's G by E by M. You'll see this term often just G by E, but we're turning more to M as part of that. So G is the genetics or the basic science that somebody's working on. The environment is all of the adaptation around the soils, the climate, the topography, the things that we don't have a great deal of control at in terms of the base level. And M is the management. So what decisions are we making? What are we doing to build it into a system, the G that the community or the research community looked at, okay? We are trying to explore research within the systems. So on-farm research, all the things that we have a history of doing and that I think we're going to do better in the future comes down to the E and M component of that, okay? So if the research goal is G by E by M, academics and industries target the G because that's where the new stuff comes from, okay? Everyone contributes to the E by M, but think about how many permutations there are in terms of how G, E, and M come together. And so industry, academics, extension, we can't do it by ourselves. We need you guys as part of that equation for everybody to benefit from, okay? So why on-farm research? Hands-on experience. The more I work in this area, the more I see that visualization is so important. We learn by seeing things, not by reading or listening to nitwits like McDonald up on the stage. We learn by looking at things. Identify a need for change. Reduce the risk of wrong decisions. That's the whole reason why on-farm research started with OSCIA. If I make that decision on my whole farm, I could be impacted by it grossly, poorly, but if I share that risk with some of my colleagues, then we all learn from that and we de-risk it in terms of the value to each individual. Competitive advantage. What can we do better in Ontario than in jurisdictions around the Great Lakes that are our competitors? Collaborations with colleagues. You know, when we do the WebExes for the Farm Smart Fridays and that, I won't send it to an individual's house because I want them to be in a room talking to people, having those discussions. We need to have that as human beings to get value out of it. Okay, so we need to extend the reach. But it has to be accurate, and so I'm going to be a little bit hard on all of us throughout a bit of this presentation because this aspect of accuracy is so critical. Okay, so what's changing on the farm? All of these things are happening, okay? I joined the ministry in 2000. About 2008 when we had the big crash in the economy, and then the prices skyrocketed in 9, 10, 11. The whole appetite for on-farm research seemed to change in the province because of some of these things, okay? So this is making collaborative on-farm research in the traditional way more and more difficult. And so part of today is exploring where we're going, and some of the presentations already this morning have sort of helped set the groundwork for that. So if we're going to go from a 6-row planter to a 36-row or a 48-row planter, all of a sudden doing on-farm research is a little more difficult, right? And so don't get mad at me. I'm just trying to identify things. But I kind of looked at the past. I kind of looked at the current scenario and where we potentially can go for the future. And so there are some constraints in how we've been doing things. And I'll show you my enlightening light bulb moment that put this in my head. But these types of things mean that we have to do better. And thankfully, with what's available to us, we can do better. But we have to think back to slide number 2, which is, who is our people? Okay? So here is the traditional 8 main steps for how to do high-quality on-farm research. And there's components of each of those, but all of those are important. And to get to the end and have something that is defendable, that you are proud of, that you are going to make decisions on, you have to follow a recipe. Okay? But you know that old saying, don't sweat the small stuff? That doesn't apply here. Okay? The problem is that the detail is what gets you the end result. And so we have to be really assured when we're doing this work in on-farm research that we have the people and the passion to make sure we do the detail and keep everything, keep all the records in place. Okay? Let's talk about site selection. If you look at these 4 parcels here, which one of those could you actually think put a trial in under our traditional way of doing things? Maybe this one here when the soil type is relatively even there in the red block. Some of those others are going to be awfully hard to put strips into, right? So let's talk about plot layouts. Where have we been? Where are we going? So this is a couple of fields from my farm in Waterloo County that my nephew Jeffrey here farms for us and does a great job. But these 2 fields, they look similar. I think it's a good site, right? Is this a suitable site when you look at it from this angle? Anybody disagree? Okay. So then look at the scenario of I'm going to do a treatment A on one field and a treatment B on the next field. Is it suitable plot layout based on those 2 fields? Come on, answer. Participatory presentation. No, okay. And the reason no is because there's a different field history between those 2 fields. So even though they're side by side, they're not the same. I can't do this and have something that I can stand up and say with definitive conviction that the difference is true, okay? We can't ignore the stats. So I'm not going to do a stats course, Warren, but I'm going to say that we can't ignore the stats because in what we're doing, we're taking an extremely small segment of a population of all the cornfields in Ontario, for instance, and we're trying to say that if we do this, that response will happen on all those fields. To do that, we have to understand what the variability is, and you can't do that with the previous model, okay? So let's take the next step then, okay? I'm going to go to only one field, and I'm going to put treatment A versus treatment B. Is this a suitable trial layout? Okay? Can it be fixed so that it is? Right, okay? So it's not because inadvertently, even though that field looks relatively even, one section of it is more likely than not to be different. And if you do the harvest, for instance, on one half of the field and compare that to the other half, you have no measure of variability to make a decision on, okay? So what can we do? We take treatment A and B, and we add, although we don't add the strips, but we take the strips closest to that zone between the 2 treatments, and we take those as our assessment parameters, okay? Is this better? Okay, so I give it a yellow instead of a red, okay? Because there's still not a lot of variability. What's missing? Replication and randomization. We don't do a good job of getting both of those. Usually we get one of the two, but it's important to try and target the two, okay? So how do we fix? We take more assessments within the strips, or we take and add a couple more strips so that we'd have 3 strips in treatment A and 3 strips in treatment B. It's still not really, really good because it's not randomized, but it is some amount of replication, okay? This is sort of the ultimate way to do things. This is the way the research community has traditionally done things. And they aren't going to be able to do this either in the future, the way things are changing. The problem with this is a scale issue, right? And a time issue. It takes a lot of time and scale to make this work. Okay? But this is a very suitable trial outlet. You've got 3 replicates, you've got 3 treatments, you've got those treatments randomized. They're all relatively the same size. They're spread out to account for variation in the field, etc. So this is the best way to do it in the traditional way we've been doing research, whether it's on-farm or not, okay? Here's the scale problem, though. When I had a 6-row planter and I wanted to do 2 replicates and 4 treatments, it took 120 foot of field frontage to get that to work. Well, all of a sudden, when everybody's buying big planters, you know, all of a sudden you're at 480 or 720 feet to do that same experiment. We aren't going to do that. So how do we do things differently and better to make it work? So here's another example I want to use. This is a field of woodrills at Guelph that we used in the Precision Smart in 2015. And I sort of superimposed some samples on top of this, or some treatments. And so 2 replicates of 3 treatments randomized. So pretty good idea. That should be, what? It's got enough degrees of freedom and stuff. And so it's a decent field to look at from the satellite, but when you delve into it a little bit more, it gets complicated, okay? So here's the but. And this is a light bulb moment that happened to me in the summer of 2015 in one of the hottest environments I'd ever been in Springfield, Missouri, when I went to the InfoAg conference. And I got a map put up in front of me like this. So this is Woodrill's map, 13 different soil types there, okay? This is the water and topography, the hydrology and the topography map associated with that site. And all of a sudden, how do I put a strip through there and make any sense of it? Okay? So if I do this, what happens? Do I have a light here? Is that a light? So as this treatment goes across, you see it's passing through different soils, therefore management zones. The response could be different from one treatment to the next between soil types, and that's all getting muddled together when we do, as we've traditionally done, sample the whole plot. Okay? So that's what the concern is. How do we address it? Well, we block everything out and we put the yield monitor on that's well calibrated, and we take yields continuously down that field, and we make treatment comparisons all the way down the transacts, comparing those treatments in each replicate as we go. Okay? So here's where we're going. Using the site-specific precision agricultural tools that are out there to do this and to make it way easier and gather way more data, okay? So we're going to use all of that technology, and I'm going to show you how it's being used, to work for us. And the thing about this is that I could get every single one of you engaged in a research project just by pushing a button that sent an email of a prescription out to you that automatically loaded into your controller. And then it went out, and then the combines gathered the data, and we can create systems that can work through and pull those together and come up with the results. So this is back to the people. We have to partner with the right people because we're not all in a position to be able to do this yet today. Keep me on time, Warren. There's lots of excellent service providers out there. I'm going to show you some examples of a couple of them, but there's lots of them, and they're willing to work with us. We need to explore this more. Okay, so here's Veritas. This is a trial that they did with Fortenza for neonicotinoid replacement, and you notice that they've got zones here identified, and the different zones have different treatments applied, and then you see these little blocks. Each one of those blocks is a validation of the treatment throughout the entire thing. But he didn't have to flick a switch. He didn't have to do anything. He just put those in the controller. It goes along. It did that all for them. The combine comes. A combine takes the data off, and we use systems to pull those two out together and make those comparisons. And what they were able to find, whoops. Can I go backwards? 12.78 bushel difference, and there was a difference between the high productive and the low productive areas. This kind of power is available to us if we can gather all of this data, and we can gather it autonomously and be way further ahead. Okay? Yield alone is not enough, because what is the underlying effect or reason that there's yield differences? We have to know that. And how do you know that? You do that by gathering all these other layers of data. So fortunately, this is a little bit small, but this is profitability mapping from Veritas. And this is where the cash hits the drawer, so to speak. So in this red zone, it's looking at profitability. There's about 9% of that field is in this red zone, which is costing you $200 to $400 of expense with no revenue return, okay? And so, yes, we are getting good benefit from most of this field, but what do we do with these red things? Do we isolate them? Do we take them out of production? If it's costing you $500 an acre, what are we doing? And this opportunity allows us to see that. Same thing, red zones break even. 25% of the land was going to require 64 to 92 bushels more to even reach break even on the field average. Okay, look at the power of that. 25% of the red zone there had to reduce its expenses for crop production by somewhere between $290 and $400 to break even. When have we ever had that kind of power of information that we can use? This is really exciting stuff. This is Agris, right? And so you're going, wow, we don't have enough of it out there. This is Agris. This is from Dale. Thanks, Dale. This is all the fields in their trading region that they've already mapped and that have different levels of layers of data already accumulated. Okay? So people are out there willing to work with us. So future of on-farm research. Every farm and every field has the potential to be a mini research farm. That is just amazing, right? And so we're working, Bill Dean and Josh Zaliski and John Sulik with service providers are working on systems to explore how do we do this so we can have you each do that. We can aggregate that data and we can pump out the individual and the aggregate results to each of us. Systems being developed to foster this collaboration. And so everything is improving at a rapid pace. And so I'm quite enthused with where we're going to be able to go. And it's this power of big data. Never have we been able to capture the volume of high quality agronomic data that is possible under the systems if we can put them in place. Okay? And all these other things that you can get. Okay? So exciting times ahead. I'm going to leave it at that. Don't forget, who are your people? I had a medical condition a couple of years ago. I tried to fix it myself for a long time. Didn't work. Ended up in hospital, radiation, all that kind of stuff. Find the right people to put in your network, and let's make it work. Thanks very much.
Wow.
Right on time.
You were bang on. We might have time for a question.
Probably not yet. Probably it's coming, but it's the relative difference, right? I really don't care about the absolute when I'm looking at treatment 1 versus treatment 2. What is the difference between them, and is that difference consistent throughout the plot? But you have to do some things. Each replicate should be run in the same direction, right? You should make sure that you're set up at a speed that you're not going to plug and have to slow down because that messes you up. And so there's some management decisions you have to make in how you incorporate that yield monitor and combine into the equation to get good, accurate data out. But it has to be calibrated. You have to have confidence in it. You have to be buying the best software updates.
Because I mean, in some of our AGMs that we've had, that these yield monitors will change based off of moisture. There's a lot of parameter that's going to change the output of a yield monitor, slope, all this stuff, right?
Yep.
So hopefully down the line, there's something that can handle moisture variation, tractor, combine slope variation, all that stuff. But there's, there can be 10 or 15% difference in yield according to a monitor based on those factors.
And that still is hurting us, Phil, in if we did everything by a combine from a full-length plot into a weigh wagon, right? Because then all of a sudden we've diluted any difference that might be happening between treatment and management zone. And so are we further ahead or behind? I don't know the answer to that. Are we in the ballpark? I think we're in the ballpark that we can see things that the volume of data will help us understand.
So a lot of the service providers are very good, but also, on an individual business, they are expensive in providing service. I know lots of computer savvy farmers who are doing their own prescriptions today. Yep. There's a myriad of softwares, MF, SMS, all these different things. I wonder if we shouldn't be looking at doing more training or putting that out so that we can be able to do this all like on our own kind of. Because I think the other thing you have to worry about is farmers get bigger and are able to adopt this technology and able to afford to pay the provider. A lot of that, I don't know how much that's going to be shared in a more competitive market.
Yeah. We are trying to address the training thing. Nicole and I and others have been meeting to discuss how we do this. We're trying to set up a little industry group to talk about this. We're working with the university. The biggest problem right now is I talked to Dan Brecken of Woodrow last week at Precision Ag Conference, and I said, what tools are you using to turn your data into decision making? And he said, all of it. So even guys as sophisticated as Woodrow, because they put a lot of effort into it, they hired Doug Aspinall from Mafra part-time in his retirement, and they're still using all the tools. So it's still complex. That's the problem. But we understand that, Chad, and we're working on it.
Okay, thank you very much. And if 2019 taught us something, one of the major limitations of yield data is the lack of that test weight layer, because that was our major variability. All right, so we're going to take a break.